Okay, thank you all so much for coming. I know we're over time. Hopefully tonight's presentation will be something interesting, something new, something valuable, and something that even if you already are familiar with Iqbal, it'll give you some interesting things to think about. And in this presentation, I want to talk about, in this order, about Iqbal, his figure and who he is. I want to talk about his idea of Khudi, and then I want to connect it to the situation in Palestine, basically. So, but before we do that, let's do something. Why are we reading poetry, right? Poetry seems like outdated business, right? Especially if you grow up in the West, especially if you grow up in Australian society. Poetry seems like the stuff they forced you to read in high school, and you hated it, right? But there are three important reasons to care about poetry, I think, as a really important in the Islamic tradition, in Muslim history, alongside art, calligraphy, architecture. One scholar says that poetry was quite simply the most important and valued form of social communication among Muslims throughout Muslim history. So poetry is really important for Muslims. And when we, as young people today, or as you're all still young, mashallah, when we decide to invest in our poetic tradition, our literary tradition, we're reviving something. The second reason is that, as Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad says, culture deepens Islam. So in a time when there is so much nonsense out there, when we live in such a confusing age, and a confused age, connecting to our Islamic tradition, reading the right kinds of literature and poetry, and appreciating the right kinds of art, strengthens our Muslim identity and kind of creates a force field that enables us to deal with the problems and issues that modern world throws at us. And the third thing is that poetry, real poetry, true poetry, channels the spirit of the Quran. True poetry in the Muslim tradition is that which takes you above yourself, which takes you to something higher. It doesn't let you sink into your nafs, but it lets you realize that there is something, it elevates your nafs. So when we read Iqbal, or elevates you above your nafs, we can say. When we read Iqbal or Rumi, and these kinds of poets, we are reading the Quran in a different accent and in a different style and in a different language. I think that's the third biggest value of taking these poets seriously. So let's talk about Iqbal. Before we do that, I have a lecture tomorrow where I'm going to talk all about language, and I'm going to go in depth into the things I just discussed, the things I just talked about. The lecture is about the value of learning or relearning our historical Muslim languages like Arabic, Farsi, Urdu, Ottoman Turkish, whatever. So that's going to be tomorrow at the same time. At that theater, hopefully it doesn't let us down tomorrow.
No, I don't think we like.
Okay, we'll have to do it in a different place. But the idea is there's a lecture tomorrow just for language and culture and thinking about these topics. So let's talk about Iqbal. Muhammad Iqbal was born in 1877 and died in 1938. He was born in Sialkot and he died in Lahore in British India, or British occupied India. And he was a poet, philosopher, politician, lawyer, all-rounder, polymath. And he was educated in both the East and the West. So he did his sort of, the first stage of his education in Lahore, and then he did a master's from Cambridge, and he did a PhD from Heidelberg in Germany. Iqbal wrote in Urdu and Persian and English, and he read in, he also wrote a bit in Punjabi, but he was also fluent in Punjabi, in Arabic, and German. So what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 languages, mashallah. And basically, Iqbal was all about a message of Muslim Muslim revival in a really, really difficult time. So Iqbal lived in one of the darkest periods of Muslim history. He sees the fall of the Ottoman Empire, right? His teachers are the last remnants of Mughal nobility who survived the brutal sack of Delhi in 1857 because they had the good fortune to not be in Delhi. So it's a really dark time. It's the height of European colonialism, imperialism. Europe is at its peak in every level. And there are some, like the response of Muslims is varied. Some Muslims, like Mustafa Kemal, said that we need to become completely European. We need to give up our religion, our culture, and just becoming exactly like Europe to become successful in this world. But Iqbal says something different. He says, no, we can keep our religion and our culture, and this is truth and it's beautiful, but we need some kind of revival, right? And his revival was multifaceted. It was an intellectual revival, a political revival, a spiritual revival. It had a very big and broad ranging message and program, befitting his status as a poet and a philosopher and a politician, right? And he was influential in South Asia, obviously, but also Iran, Central Asia, and also in the Arab and the Malay world. Someone was telling me that the first Prime Minister of Indonesia, whose name escapes me, was a big fan of Iqbal and writes about Iqbal in his autobiography. So Iqbal had a really wide-ranging influence. He was also deeply inspired by Sufi thought. He claimed Maulana Rumi as his teacher. Now, I want to share a quote. Let's talk about some of his sort of titles. So he's called Hakim al-Ummah, which means sage of the Ummah, and Shair al-Mashriq, poet of the East. And he's known as Allama Muhammad Iqbal, and Allama is an honorary title given to a polymath in the Islamic tradition, someone who's an expert in multiple fields of knowledge and science. And this is like the classic picture of Iqbal, very dapper in his suit, very wise, and and then I put this picture because Iqbal was also an insan. He was a human. He had a personality, and it shows this beautiful informality and warmth, I think, in this picture. Now, I want to share a quote. Who knows who Muhammad Asad is? Muhammad Asad. 1, 2. Okay, mashallah. So Muhammad Asad is a really important 20th century Muslim, and he was a Jew who converted to Islam and contributed a lot to the Muslim Ummah in the 20th century. And he traveled a lot in the Arab world. He spent a lot of time in South Asia. He did an epic tafsir of the Quran. Muhammad Asad spent 4 years with Iqbal, and I wanted to share a quote from Muhammad Asad's autobiography. So he says, the trait which distinguished Iqbal more than anything else was his inner quiet. Here was a man entirely at peace within himself and with God. A man who almost always spoke softly, often with a sweet, slow smile playing around his lips and lighting up his face. Indeed, he liked to smile on the least occasion, betraying a nature without guile and without rancor. And so one could easily understand why so many people regarded him not only with deep respect, but also with love. Everyone with whom he conversed was made to feel as if he were the person most important to him in all the world. And if that reminds you of a characteristic of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, it should, because that's exactly how our Prophet dealt with the people around him. And that was the reason why he was listened to by all who knew him as no other man was listened to in his time. So that's a bit about the shakhsiyat, about the personality of Iqbal. Now, Iqbal had a big program, as I discussed, a program of revival. But where does it start? And where is it relevant to us? I think that the centerpiece of Iqbal's program is his idea of Khudi. So Khudi is a Persian word, and it means selfhood or positive ego. So Khudi is like the opposite of like ana. We have like negative ego, Often ego is understood in a negative sense. Having a big ego, is a bad thing. But Khudi is like also ego, but in a positive sense. Khudi is like developing a moral sense, restraining one's nafs, attaining self-realization. Iqbal himself describes Khudi as self-reliance, self-respect, self-confidence, self-preservation, even self-assertion. Khudi is about piety, devotion, dignity, courage, steadfastness. It's about knowing your purpose and striving for it with dignity. That's Khudi. Now, let's read a couple of couplets to kind of unpack different aspects of Khudi, right? So, this is the first poem on the sheet. So Iqbal writes, "परवाज़ है दोनों की इसी एक फ़ज़ा में, करगिस का जहां और है, शाही का जहां और." Though they share the same sky, the vulture and the eagle are worlds apart. Who can describe the characteristics of a vulture for me?
Praise on dead bodies.
Preys on dead bodies. Okay. Yes. Yes. What else? Scavengers. Generally not well regarded as reputable animals. Very sort of seen as lowly, and they feed off the the work of others, that sort of thing, right? Who can describe an eagle? What are the characteristics of an eagle? Noble, exactly. Noble, proud, strong, decisive. Iqbal's not really talking about vultures and eagles, right? Poetry uses metaphors. So the vulture is a metaphor for a person, and the eagle is also a metaphor for a person, right? The vulture is the one who is lazy, right? Who is unoriginal, uncreative, leeches off the work of others. The eagle is the one who is strong, decisive, creative, dynamic, right? And then there's also like a third level to understand this poem. The vulture is the one who is controlled by their nafs. The eagle is the insan who has controlled their nafs. So just in this short poem, Iqbal is giving us a very beautiful explanation of what the ideal Muslim should be like. The one with Khudi and the one without Khudi, right? If you have Khudi, you're noble, proud, decisive, strong like an eagle. And if you don't have Khudi, you're pathetic, weak, right? That's one angle to look at Khudi. Here's another one. Oh, there's two more. So he says, "रगों में वो लहू बाकी नहीं है, वो दिल वो आरज़ू बाकी नहीं है, नमाज और रोज़ा और कुर्बानी और हज, ये सब बाकी है, तू बाकी नहीं है." There's no blood left in these veins. There's no heart, no desire. Prayer and fasting and qurbani and hajj, these all remain, but it's you who doesn't remain. So here he's talking to the Muslims of his time, and he's saying, okay, yeah, I guess you pray, you fast, you go on hajj, you do all these things, but there's something else that a Muslim also needs to have: an energy, a drive, a vision, determination, passion. That's Khudi, right? In this one, in the next couple, Iqbal says, "Dayar ishq mein apna maqam paida kar, naya zamana, naye subh sham paida kar." In the house of love, make your abode, make a new age, a new morning and evening. What does it mean to make your abode in the house of love? What does that mean? Anyone have any ideas?
Find your identity. Find yourself.
So be strong, be decisive, powerful, but don't be harsh. Don't be cruel. Don't pursue power for the sake of power. Have a higher purpose, which is ishq, right? So ishq is a concept, if you understand it in the Islamic tradition, it's connected to the idea of spiritual betterment and dedicating yourself to a higher purpose, right? So on one level, making your abode, so the one who has Khudi makes their abode in the Diyar Ishq, right? In the house of love. They're kind, generous, gracious, nice people to be around, right? Because Iqbal's vision of Khudi is not tied up with harshness and selfishness, not at all. Does that make sense? Because someone who has a lot of ambition, also you could say, you know, they have like a big ego, a big Khudi, right? But they often do terrible things in pursuit of that ambition. So Iqbal is like defining what Khudi means in this couplet. The second thing is, when he uses this word ishq, he's like tapping into the tradition of tasawwuf, right? And he's saying that the one who has Khudi is also one who is interested in bettering themselves and controlling their nafs, right? Muraqaba, muhasaba, one who is on a path of like spiritual betterment as well. That's the second like layer of him using this word. Yes.
I was wondering, because there's different types of words that mean love. So the use of word ishq here,
Yes.
what does that mean?
So that's very directly like divine love, like a connection to the divine. But the English word love just doesn't cut it. I could have put divine love or something, but that's because you could have said diyar muhabbat or something, right? Diyar sharaf, whatever, diyar hawa, but diyar ishq. It's a very deliberate use of terminology there. And here, make a new age. Sorry, did someone?
Maybe I answer to the Khalid question. We have in our tradition a story of Awais Karni, who hadn't met the Prophet, but he was somewhere and he came to know that during Uhud, the Prophet lost teeth to teeth. So that the story says that he had his in love of the Prophet, although he had not met him. But he had his all teeth or some of the teeth removed. This is a story which we heard, but there are issues. I suppose it's also the love for the Prophet. It's also a metaphor because we think the Prophet was someone who was actually an example, or Quran, I mean the book, the Hazrat Aisha said. It may be taken also in that sense,
because the love of the Prophet is extension.
Because he created a new age, a new morning, a new evening. So if you will follow him, and I think that can be one of the meanings.
I think you should be up here. You're doing a better job than me. This second line, I want to echo that. Ishq is also related to the Prophet. This is about the energy and decisiveness of the one with Khudi. They control the circumstances. They are not controlled by the circumstances. That's also what having Khudi means. Yes.
Just very quickly, the house of love, I don't imagine that this is a physical place. It's more of a metaphor for potentially the presence of those who have divine love. Is that correct? Or the characteristics of...
I mean, Diyar means like abode, basically. House or abode or place.
So a place of divine love, like what would an example be if we had to think about it?
Like, and what he means here is like situate yourself in the parameters of divine love.
Okay.
Not in your ego. Yeah. So you're working for something bigger, not for yourself. That's what it means.
It's not actually like physical space, it's more so restraining of your characteristics within the bounds of...
Yeah, it's metaphorical, of course. Yeah.
In fact, Diyar is in Urdu. Diyar is also like a world. It's much bigger than a world. It's world. So it's not Diyar is a world.
But I think the ishq is different from muhabbat because ishq has to do with a certain passion, some craze, if you like. You know, passion and the jnoon.
Yeah.
Exactly what it is.
Yes.
I think, from my understanding, the house of love is the internal state, which is when they say, when you love someone, it feels like home. And so building your home inside, which is all of your values, all of your personal pillars, all of your striving, comes from divine love, the love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So all of your values and foundations should come from that. And so building your home inside is how you strengthen that house in groundedness in this dunya, connected to the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Excellent. Okay. Some more couplets. Here he says here, मेरा फकर बेहतर है सिकंदरी से, ये आदमगरी है वो आईना साजी. My asceticism means like simplicity, is better than being an Alexander. Mine is the crafting of humans, and that, being an Alexander, is the making of mirrors. So this couplet is saying, Khudi again is not about actually your own ego. Khudi is about tying yourself or your ego to something bigger. Crafting of humans, like bettering yourself, right? And striving to attain higher and higher levels of ethical and spiritual perfection. Whereas Alexander, Napoleon, Caesar, Putin, Netanyahu, all of these are people with big egos who crush the dreams of millions in the pursuit of their own ego, right? But Iqbal is saying there's something bigger, and he's saying it's illusionary, like it's just staring into your own self. Something very beautiful here, I think. Yes?
I really love these lines. Have some of the few that I've come across from Iqbal. But a question that I have is, he uses the term Khudi, and it's somehow unique to Iqbal.
Yes.
Whereas me reading this, it seems as if there's a great Sufi speaking here.
Yeah.
Because this is the entire point of Islamic learning, is to realize Tawheed, right? To see that everything is dependent on Allah. So what is it that makes this idea unique or distinct from, let's say, what prior scholars have been speaking about? I think there's a mystic.
Iqbal's Khudi has a genealogy that traces. So first of all, it's like his original contribution to the Islamic tradition. He takes the word Khudi and he actually gives it a new definition that was actually a bit controversial in his time, because Khudi was always seen in the negative way, as I started the presentation with. But Iqbal's Khudi has a genealogy with Nietzsche's Superman, which is this idea of being strong and being powerful and not letting nothing stop you. But it also has a genealogy with Ibn Arabi's Insan al-Insan al-Kamil, which is this idea of like achieving ethical perfection. And it combines the two. And for Iqbal, everything has a Khudi. A person has a Khudi that needs to be like developed, but even objects have a Khudi, and groups have a Khudi, and a nation has a Khudi. So he ties Khudi very directly to like political and sort of social context as well. It's not just an individual idea of ethical perfection. Yeah. So it's self-realization, but it's also like acting on the world. So it's both of these things. And that may be something unique or more unique in the Islamic tradition, perhaps. Whereas in Tasawwuf, certainly it's always been the first ethical perfection, but the relationship to the external world is not always consistent, I guess, depending on the scholar, so or on the thinker. So he ties Khudi very directly to political ideas, as we'll see a bit later on. Yes.
Very quickly, just two questions. So the actual definition of Khudi means like egotistical potentially? Or?
Positive ego.
So did Iqbal make it more positive ego?
Yes.
He redefined it.
Yes.
But like nowadays, if we talk about Khudi, not in the context of Iqbal, would it still mean positive ego? Like,
Yeah, because Iqbal defined it so definitively that if you ever hear the word Khudi, it's related to Iqbal.
All right.
Yeah.
And the second question here, you said that objects have Khudi.
Mm.
What would that mean? If I had to give my answer, obviously it doesn't mean objects potentially like alive per se, but potentially like the way you utilize an object could be a kind of mirror of your Khudi.
Yes, for sure. But object having Khudi is like a tree has Khudi. A tree is like strong and proud, knows its purpose, is not distracted by foolish things, and it is the best damn tree that ever existed. That's a tree that has Khudi. That's the kind of idea. Like everything has a purpose and an essence that needs to be realized. And if that essence is not being realized, then that's a wasted creature or a wasted creation.
So you like personify it. That's like the approach that you take.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's more philosophical, but his idea is that everything has an essence that needs to be realized. That's Khudi. Yeah.
Do you mind if I just
Yes.
Oh, sorry, what your name? From my understanding, I think Abraham Maslow has the hierarchy of needs.
Say again, sorry.
Abraham Maslow has the hierarchy of needs.
Maslow. Yes. Yes.
And then Tony Robbins narrowed it down to emotional needs. And so there's the 7 needs, and the 3 higher needs are contribution, love, and growth.
Mm.
And that's where you self-actualize.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're on that level, through divine love and the purpose of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not to fulfill the lower needs. And the lower needs are significance, connection, variety, and certainty. So the 3 higher needs is when we reach the point of self-actualization. And so when we talk about the positive ego, I think it's you have the lower needs. It's like when you give zakat, you're still fulfilling your own need to contribute, but you're fulfilling your ego in a way that is beneficial to someone else for the sake of God. Where if you were to go and buy a really big cheeseburger that's more self-fulfilling, then it would be in contribution.
Or like a big car or something.
Yeah.
Thank you for that contribution. This couplet here. Khudi ka sirre nihan la ilaha illallah. Khudi hai tere fisan la ilaha illallah. Sorry, tere fisan la ilaha illallah. So the hidden secret of Khudi is la ilaha illallah. Khudi is a sword sharpened on the whetstone of la ilaha illallah shahada. A whetstone is a stone you use to sharpen a sword. Here Iqbal is connecting Khudi to like Islam and Tawheed very, very clearly. Okay, so Gigi.
Can we interact?
Yes, please.
I suppose once the Khudi, the concept of Khudi as we have discussed, once you say La ilaha illallah, there is no God but Allah, then you will not go your head off in front of the false God. So you would be, that's a Khudi. You are proud of yourself. For you, once you say it's only Allah, so La ilaha illallah, then it means you have that Khudi. Or then you are not afraid of false God.
It's like a method of like really setting in stone that you're confident, like there's no God but Allah. So
And then you have that pride in yourself. Then
Okay. And 2 more things on Khudi. This section anyway. So here he has a couple of lines. तेरे दरिया में तूफान क्यों नहीं है? खुदी तेरी मुसलमान क्यों नहीं है? अबस है शिकवाए तकदीर याज़दां, तू खुद तकदीर याज़दां क्यों नहीं है? Why is your ocean not roiling with storms? Why is your Khudi not Muslim? Complaining of God's destiny is a waste. Why are you yourself not God's destiny? This one here. खुदी को कर बुलंद इतना कि हर तकदीर से पहले खुदा बंदे से खुद पूछे बता तेरी रज़ा क्या है? Elevate your Khudi so high that at every turn of fate, God will ask his slave, tell me, what do you want? Here there's a verse of the Quran that comes to mind, Surah Bayyinah, where the verse goes, Radiyallahu anhum wa radawu anhum. God is pleased with them and they are pleased with God. It's a really interesting relationship between man and God. God is pleased with them and they are pleased with God. Here Iqbal is saying that the one who has elevated their Khudi, because Khudi has like levels, right? It comes back to this spiritual idea of, and the Quran, the self has levels. The nafs has different levels. Nafs al-amara, nafs al-lawama, nafs al-mutma'inna. And nafs al-mutma'inna is basically the one who has Khudi at its highest level. And the idea is when you dedicate yourself to a true purpose, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your intentions, your desires become purified, and essentially what you become like the arm of God in this world, the sword of God in this world. That's what it's saying. So God will ask his slave. He's still a slave, but there's an interesting like dynamic that's happening here, which is also different to the way ideas of self-actualization may be expressed in other ways in Muslim history, going back to your point. You don't have any thoughts on this? It's kind of like, it's almost like confronting. It's kind of like a very radical idea.
I think one of the things that perhaps in the conversations that will probably follow, even on a personal note, is the decline of the Muslim world.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe what Iqbal is saying is actually very similar to what Muslim scholars and thinkers have said before.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like an articulation of those realities.
Mm-hmm.
But the context there is that Muslims are defeated and they're conquered, and
Yes.
Napoleon, the invasion of Napoleon, you're getting different kinds of responses. So that's how I'm reading it. That perhaps it's a call to kind of put more confidence in rising.
Yeah, it's like, well, we're at our lowest, and then some people thought and still think, what can we do? We'll just wait for Imam Mahdi to come and everything will be fixed. But Iqbal says, no. Like, complaining of God's destiny is a waste. Why aren't you yourself God's destiny? Why aren't you strong and powerful and upright? Why are you so low and submissive? It's a really powerful message, especially for its time. Yeah. Okay. Now, what we've talked about so far is Khudi on like the individual level. But Iqbal connects Khudi to the community very, very clearly. He makes it a sort of communal imperative. So the person has Khudi or needs to build their Khudi, but the nation, the community also has a Khudi that could be defeated, or that could be dominant. So here in this in Persian, Iqbal says, "Fardukum ayna yak digaran." Fardukum ayna yak digaran. And here there's a hadith of the Prophet that comes to mind. Al-mu'minu miratil mu'mini. The Muslim is a mirror to the other Muslim, or al-mu'minu mirati akhihi al-mu'min. The Muslim is a mirror to his brother in faith. So this idea of the ayna is a really interesting expression here. So qawm fard ayna yak digaran salk buhar kashkashan wa akhtaran. Fard mi gard ze millat ihtiram, millat az afrad mi yabad nizam. Fard ta andar jamaat gum shavad. Individual and the nation are reflections of each other. So when the individuals have Khudi, when they're strong and proud, the nation will be strong and proud. Like the thread and its pearls. So the pearls are the individual, and the thread, of course, is the nation or the community. Or like the galaxy and its stars. Iqbal, by the way, loves using cosmic metaphors and cosmic imagery. That deserves a whole lecture of its own. An individual gains respect from the nation, from the community, and a nation gains cohesion from its individuals. Unless the individual loses himself in the nation, he's but a drop seeking the vastness of the ocean. And compare this to sort of like Western philosophies and Western ways of thinking, which are very individualistic, which are like, be yourself and discover yourself and be your best and you be you, but there's very little emphasis or no emphasis on the idea of the collective anymore. So Iqbal is like combining two things in a sense here. Anyone have any thoughts? Now, so Iqbal, Khudi is about self-dignity, self-respect, self-agency, and then communities also have Khudi. So like the nation or the collective needs to have a sense of Khudi. And what Iqbal now does is he defines the collective or the nation in a particular way. And this is really important. This will bring us to contemporary events in Palestine, of course. So Iqbal is anti-nationalist. Iqbal lives in a time where the Muslim world is moving from the age of empires to the age of nation states. And that's the world we live in today. We live in a world of nation states. But Iqbal sees this trend and he's against this trend. And he goes against the current, whereas a lot of the other Muslims of his time supported the idea of nationalism, right? Iqbal is against nationalism based on earthly things. Okay, so he writes here, he says, "In ताज़ा खुदाओं में सबसे बड़ा वतन है, जो पीरहन इसका है वो मज़हब का कफन है." Amongst the new gods of our age, it means like the modern age, the biggest is the country. Its clothing, pirhan, is the burial shroud, kafan, of religion. This is nationalism kills religion. हो कैद मकामी तो नतीजा है तबाही. रह बहर में आज़ाद वतन सूरत माही. This limitation to the local results in destruction. Live like the fish in the ocean, free from the bounds of nation. है तरके वतन सुन्नत महबूब इलाही. दे तू भी नबूवत की सदाकत की गवाही. अक़वाम में मखलूक़ खुदा बत्ती है इसी से. कौमियत इस्लाम की जड़ कटती है इसी से, इससे. God's creation is unjustly divided by this nationalism. The Islamic concept of community is uprooted by this. So, Khudi, again, is about self-assertion and God consciousness, and it's plugged into a community awareness built on religious solidarity. This line is interesting. When the Prophet Muhammad was promulgating his mission, and especially when they arrived to Medina,
You used that Khudi.
I'm going to come here and repeat you. Islam asked of the Arabs at the time to leave behind their tribal identities. That's what this here means. And he asked the Arabs of the time to sublimate into a new and a bigger identity. And that gave them power and strength and dignity that they had never ever seen before. Okay, so if we think about what's happening in Palestine, the biggest problem is that as an ummah, we're divided, right? Everyone is living in their own house, thinking about their own needs, and sort of the weakest link is the one that is left out to dry, right? The weakest link, the Palestinians, the Uyghurs, the Rohingya, the Kashmiris, weak links. They don't have a house of their own. We need to worry about our own house. But maze ki baat ye hai, the thing is that these houses didn't even exist a little while ago. So like, what kind of strange situation are we in? Let's talk a bit about Iqbal and Palestine. So Iqbal was really concerned about the situation in Palestine. He wrote about it, spoke about it in his prose and his poetry. This is a picture of Iqbal here at a conference in Jerusalem with senior leaders of like the Palestinian community. There is Grand Mufti Al-Amin here in the middle, who's a prominent Palestinian alim. So Iqbal, like Palestine was really on his mind, and he could see, like others of his time, the consequences of the forced establishment of a Zionist state in Palestinian land like 100 years ago. He writes, "है खाके फिलिस्तीन पे यहूदी का अगर हक, इस्पानिया पर हक नहीं क्यों अहले अरब का? मकसद है मुल्कियत इंग्लिस का कुछ और, किस्सा नहीं नारंज का या शहर रुतब का." If Jews have a right to the soil of Palestine, why don't the Arabs have a right to reclaim Hispania, Andalusia? Here's pointing out the absurdity of the Zionist excuse that, oh, we lived here 2,000 years ago, therefore we have a right to it. He says, well, okay, well, what about the Arabs? If you're going to play this game, apply the rules fairly, basically. The intentions of British imperialism are not what they seem. This is no story of oranges and honey and dates. Because the British took over the land, they said, we're going to take care of you and we're going to guide you and we're going to tutor you. So they had this thing called a mandate system, which was like, you guys aren't mature enough to take care of yourself, so we'll help you along the way until you're mature enough. That was the whole idea of the mandate system. And Iqbal, you can see through it very clearly, right? He has another poem here, which is I think incredibly relevant. Zamana ab bhi nahi jiske soor se farid. मैं जानता हूँ वो आतिश तेरे वजूद में है. The world is still alight from this flame. I know the fire that burns within. तेरी दवा ना जनीवा में है ना लंदन में. फरंग की रगे जान पंजरे यहूद में है. Your cure is neither in Geneva or in London. The throats of Europe are in the grip of the Jews. Of course, Iqbal is not being anti-Semitic here when he says grip of the Jews. Here he's referring to the Zionists, right? And your cure is neither in Geneva or London. Here Iqbal is saying, you can't, this poem I should have mentioned, the title of the poem is called Filistini Arab Se, to the Palestinians. He's saying that you guys can't rely on the UN or the League of Nations, which is the predecessor to the UN, or the Red Cross, or this organization or that organization. You don't rely on them to save you. Don't rely on the sympathy of people in the West and in Europe. How long will you have to wait for them to see you as human beings? Don't rely on that. सुना है मैंने गुलामी से उम्मतों की निजात, खुदी की परवरिश और इज्जत, खुदी की परवरिश और इज्जत नमूद में. I have heard though that nations gain freedom from slavery by building their Khudi. What we see, I think, in Palestine today is we see the blatant abandonment of the Palestinian people, right? And we see a lack of Khudi, certainly in the leaders of the Muslim world or the Arab world. There are 50 Muslim countries, 50 armies, and yet everyone is watching the slaughter in Gaza, and making pithy verbal statements and not really doing anything about it. Palestine is kind of really inconvenient for the Muslim leaders. They want to get on with it and make business deals with Israel and make themselves rich. And what's happening in Palestine is can't you guys just shut up and just accept what's being done to you? That's what's going through Bin Salman's mind. That's what's going through Sisi's mind, right? They don't have Khudi. What is positive, though, is that the common person on the Arab street in the Muslim world does care about Palestine, and they're out and protesting. So there is something positive that's here, but we have, of course, a big disconnect between the common person and the leaders. I want to talk a bit about the situation in Palestine from a sort of big picture. I'm a student of international relations and political science. So if we think about where the Muslim Ummah is today in the 21st century, we kind of have this structural problem. So the Ummah is like splintered into a system of nation states. And there's an internal logic of competitive, self-interested like units, right? So we can't care too much about those people because we have to take care of our own people first, right? And these units, these nation states, are largely ideologically predicated upon ethnic or lingual or geographic or civic identities, and not Islam, right? And thirdly, these units, these nations, are ruled by, with very few exceptions, self-interested autocratic elites, military dictatorships, authoritarian monarchies, kleptocratic ruling class. Like, that's a mess, right? How do we get out of this mess? Because if we don't, what's happening in Palestine will keep happening. What's happening in Kashmir will keep happening. What's happening to the Uyghurs, to the Rohingyas will keep happening. I think Khudi gives us like a framework, a normative framework to break out of this trap. Does that make sense? It's like fuel for a new fire, in a sense. If we all think about Iqbal's message of Muslim unity and Khudi and self-respect and dignity, I think we can start to break kind of like these mental chains of slavery that we have, that like, what can we really do about those people? You know, we need to worry about our own people first, sort of thing. And I know it seems like hopeless and futile and overly idealistic and naive to even think this way, right? Maybe that's what some of you are thinking. Especially when what's happening to the Palestinians in Gaza is happening, or you have, for example, the government of Pakistan humiliating 1.7 million Afghan refugees. I'm not, like, for what good reason, right? Or you have the Uyghurs abandoned in their concentration camps. So I know it seems so hopeless, but we have to start somewhere, right? And God will hold us accountable for what we could do with what we have, right? With what He gave us. We can't necessarily change the world, but we can try, and that's Iqbal's message. Khudi is that drive, that determination to imagine something better. That's Khudi. So there's a couplet here. Yeah, this is a beautiful couplet. Iqbal ka tarana bange dara hai goya, hota hai jada pema, fir karavan hamara. Iqbal's song is like the bell of a caravan. With this, then, once more, our caravan departs for its destination. I have a friend I have a Palestinian friend. My best friend is from Gaza. He's not in Gaza, but his family is trapped there. I said to him, look, I'm giving a lecture on Palestine and Khudi. Is there anything you want me to say? He said that, you know, if Palestinians haven't given up, if they're still fighting and if they're still strong and proud and they have Khudi, then we have no right to give up. We have no excuse to feel defeated or hopeless. And he said, you know, make dua, but don't just do dua. The one who only does dua is kind of the one who has no other option. Do dua, but keep speaking, attend protests, write to your politicians, right? When you do all of these things, you're manifesting Khudi. And at the very, very least, apart from dua, use what's happening as a reminder, as motivation to better yourself, right? If your connection, just like Sheikh said in the khutbah today, you know, at the very, very least, fix your habits and strengthen your connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At the very least, we can take that lesson. If not for God's sake, then for the Palestinians' sake, right? Let's end with one more couplet, which is in Farsi. Iqbal says, Muslim hasti sina raz arzu abad dar, har zaman pesh nazar la yukhliqul mi'ad dar. You are a Muslim. Fill your heart with longing, with determination and energy and Khudi at all times. Keep in mind, He does not fail in His promise. This is from Surah Al-Imran, verse number 9. God does not fail in His promise. I'd like to finish with that. If anyone has any questions or comments, please let me know. Yes?
I have a big question.
A big question.
I don't expect a whole answer, obviously.
Okay.
But what I was seeing was that we're in a mess right now. Obviously, a lot of the Muslim nations are like segmented, and I imagine, like, if I had to theorize, it would be caused by the fact that we aren't actually developing our Khudi. So that's one cause. But what has caused us not to prioritize our Khudi? Like, over these years, as the Muslim Ummah has become segmented, like, how has it actually become segmented? I know it's like multi-factors, like so many things you can talk about. But if you had to like deliver the main reasons, what would they roughly be? Yeah, you can tell
It's a big question.
very big question.
Look, I'll come back to the point I made. I think like we're structurally trapped in a system. We're playing a game where the rules have been written by someone else, and the rules are rigged against us. So Iqbal says, nationalism is a new idol, right? People don't die for God or live for God, they live and die for the country, which is an artificial idea that a bunch of people around a table, come up with, and people form their entire identity around lines drawn on a map. This affiliation to nationalism, it undermines like religious solidarity, and it's not that like all the Muslims are like bad Muslims. It's that like we're trapped in this scheme. Someone asked Imran Khan, the ex-Prime Minister of Pakistan, when you were in power, you sold out the Uyghurs. You said, you denied Uyghur oppression. You didn't raise your voice for Uyghurs who are like whose Islam is being crushed from their souls in these concentration camps. And Uyghurs are just next to Pakistan, right? And Imran Khan said, I'm a leader of a nation of 250 million people, and you want me to care about the Uyghurs who are like 5 million people over there? Say kaha, inhone. Galat bhi kaha. He said what he said makes sense, but it's also awful, right? It's like the logic of this system. So we need to have the creativity and the bravery and the Khudi to think of a better system. Like if Europe, after 1,000 years of war and the most destructive 2 world wars in the 20th century, if Europe can make a European Union and do something better, then are we animals? We can't also do something better. So it's at every stage, at every level, prioritizing Muslim unity, and saying that, and thinking beyond, not just about tribal loyalties, whether they're like real or artificial. Yeah, that's what I would say. It's like a big problem.
Really good, mashallah. Like the question I often struggle with, I said we talk about Pakistan, like you've seen the term Islamic